The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 11 minutes before Darien Voss noticed it. He wasn't supposed to notice it at all. The beacon was operating on a frequency 2 octaves below standard emergency band, the kind of low, rolling signal that most modern receivers would filter as atmospheric noise. Darien's receiver was not modern. It was a salvaged unit he'd bolted to the underside of his workbench 3 years ago, stripped from a decommissioned ore hauler that a scrap dealer in Port Orville had been selling for parts. It was ugly, it was temperamental, and it picked up frequencies that properly calibrated systems were legally required to ignore. He almost ignored it anyway. The storm outside his outpost on Vereth's edge had been going for 6 hours. True winter on this moon meant wind that could peel the thermal paneling off a standard shelter if the anchoring bolts weren't sunk deep enough. Darien's bolts were sunk deep enough. He'd learned that the hard way in his first season. But the sound the wind made against the outer hull was not a sound that encouraged a person to step outside. It was a low, sustained moan, the kind of noise that ancient humans had once attributed to spirits, and even knowing better, Darien found it had a persuasive quality. The beacon pulsed again. He sat up straighter at his bench, setting down the circuit assembly he'd been working on. Listened. The signal wasn't panicked, it wasn't the rapid, high-pitched squeal of someone actively dying. It was slow, measured, repeating at intervals that suggested either sophisticated distress equipment or a sender who was conserving power, because they expected to be waiting a while. Darien pulled up the directional overlay on his nav screen. The signal was coming from the eastern ridge, roughly 400 meters from his outpost's outer door, up an elevation grade of about 30 degrees. In a storm like this, with visibility at maybe 8 meters and the temperature outside somewhere around -40, 400 meters might as well be 4 kilometers. He sat there for another 2 minutes, thinking about it. Then he put on his cold gear. It took him 40 minutes to cover the 400 meters. He moved in segments, from the outpost door to the first anchor post, clipping his safety line. From the anchor post to the equipment cache, which gave him a brief windbreak. From the equipment cache up the ridge slope, fighting for each step against the wind, the snow compacted to near ice under his boots, his headlamp cutting maybe 6 meters into the white-gray dark. He almost walked past her. She was lying in a depression in the snow, partially sheltered by an outcropping of volcanic rock, and she was so still that his first thought, before he processed what he was actually seeing, was that she was a piece of equipment that had fallen from somewhere. Cargo, something mechanical. Then he registered the shape of her and understood that she was alive, or had been recently, and he dropped to his knees beside her. She was large. Larger than any person he'd seen up close, around 2 meters tall even folded as she was, her legs tucked partially beneath her body. Her suit was unlike anything in his registry, a fitted composite material in deep gray-black that looked like it had been designed to move with her rather than encase her, with articulated plating along the shoulders and spine that was dented and scored in multiple places, as if she'd been through something very bad recently. On her left side, below the last rib, a section of the plating had been punched inward. The material had compressed rather than shattered, which probably meant it had done its job. But even through his gloves, when he put his hand carefully against the damaged area, he could feel heat. Her face was turned away from him. He could see hair, actual hair, dark and long, plastered against the back of her neck and the stone beneath her. Her skin, where it was visible at her neck and at the edge of her collar, was a pale silver gray, and it was beautiful in the way that ice is beautiful, cold, luminous, geometric. She had 4 fingers on the hand he could see. Her fingers were long and ended in short, blunt nails that were the color of graphite. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. The pulse he found there was slow, far too slow for a human, but it was regular, strong, even. Whatever she was, whatever had happened to her, her heart was working. "Okay," Darien said to himself in the howling dark. "Okay." He'd taken a first aid course. He'd taken 3 first aid courses, because living alone on an extraction station on an outer moon, with the nearest medical facility 40 minutes of fast travel away, had persuaded him some years ago that first aid was a skill worth having. He was not a doctor. He was not even close to a doctor. He was a 31-year-old geological survey technician with a salvaged emergency beacon receiver and a working knowledge of human anatomy. This was not human anatomy, but the basics he was fairly sure were universal. Warm her up, get her out of the wind, don't move her spine if you don't have to, assess the injury site. He got his arms under her and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, which was saying something because she looked very heavy. Darian was not a small man, and he'd kept himself in functional physical condition because, again, living alone on an outer moon created certain practical incentives. But carrying her 400 meters down an icy slope in a windstorm was not something his body found easy or pleasant. He did it anyway. He stopped 3 times to rest. On the second rest, he checked her pulse again with 2 fingers against her neck, still there, still strong. She'd made a sound when he'd first lifted her, a low sound, not quite a word, not quite a groan, something between them, but since then she'd been silent. He got her inside. The outpost's main room was not large, maybe 7 meters by 5, with the sleeping alcove off one end and the equipment bay off the other. It felt very small with her in it. He laid her down on his sleeping pallet, the only surface long enough to accommodate her full length, and sat back on his heels and looked at her properly for the first time in the light. She was extraordinary. That was the only word for it. Even injured, even unconscious, even with her suit battered and her hair tangled with ice crystals, she was extraordinary. Her face was long and angular, with cheekbones that were almost architectural in their precision, and her features had the quality of something that had been designed by someone who was very good at what they did. Her eyes were closed, and her lashes were dark against her silver skin. There was a small scar along her jaw, old, fully healed, that was slightly lighter than the surrounding skin. She wasn't human, that was clear. But she wasn't entirely unlike human either, in the way that a great many species in the settled galaxy were not unlike human. Same basic bilateral symmetry, same general distribution of features. Evolution, across 100 worlds, had found similar solutions to similar problems. Darian got to work. He cut away the damaged section of her suit carefully, using the composite shears from his emergency kit. The plating beneath it had been compressed against her side, and when he got it off and looked at the skin underneath, he found bruising, deep and extensive, spreading from roughly her lower ribs down to her hip. The bruising was not the same color as human bruising. On her silver skin it was a deep blue-violet, like a storm system in a gas giant's atmosphere, and it covered an area approximately the size of his hand. He didn't know what that meant for her physiology. He didn't know if she had internal bleeding. He didn't know if her ribs were broken in a way that had created a serious problem or a manageable one. He didn't know almost anything about her biology except that her pulse was strong and her breathing, which he measured carefully, was slow but regular. He did what he could. He cleaned the skin surface with the antiseptic from his kit, not knowing if it would harm her, but knowing that contaminated wounds were a universal problem. He wrapped her side in the compression bandaging, gentle, not too tight. He got the thermal blanket over her, and the heating element in the wall turned up as high as it would go. Then he pulled his chair up to the side of the pallet and settled in to watch her. She was awake 4 hours later. He almost missed it. He dozed in the chair, but some shift in the quality of silence in the room woke him, and he opened his eyes to find her watching him. Her eyes were amber, a very pure, clear amber like good whiskey held up to light with a dark ring around the iris. They were oriented directly at him and they were entirely alert. No confusion, no disorientation. Whoever she was, she came back to consciousness the way a switch comes back to on. "Hello," Darian said. She said something. It was not in any language he spoke, and his translator, which was on the workbench across the room, wasn't close enough to catch it. But the tone of it was a question. He stood, moved to the workbench, brought the translator back. "Can you say that again?" A pause. Then, slower this time, with the careful enunciation of someone who has experience with translation technology. "Where am I?" "My outpost, Verath's Edge, Eastern Sector," he paused. "I found you on the ridge. You were broadcasting a distress signal." Another pause, longer this time. Her eyes moved, taking in the room, the ceiling, the walls, then coming back to him. "You carried me. You were too far out to move any other way." "I am not," she stopped, seemed to recalculate something. "I am not a small person to carry." "No," he agreed, "you're not." Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, a small change around the eyes, a slight adjustment at the corners of her mouth. He wasn't sure what it was. "What is your name?" "Darian Voss, Geological Survey, what's yours?" She looked at him for a moment before she answered. "Sarath." "Just Sarath?" "For now," she said. "Yes." He let that go. "How are you feeling? I treated the bruising on your left side. I don't know much about your physiology, so I'm not sure how effective it was, but I kept the area clean and used compression. Your breathing has been regular." She shifted, very slightly, and then was very still. He could tell she was assessing herself, running some internal inventory that he wasn't party to. "You used antiseptic?" "Yes. I didn't know if it would be compatible, but I didn't know what else to do." "It is compatible," she said. "The bruising is significant, but the underlying structure is intact. Whatever you did with the compression appears to have helped stabilize it." She looked at him again with those amber eyes. "You are a medical professional." "No, I took some courses. I was mostly guessing." The shift in her expression again, that same small, hard-to-read thing. "You carried me 400 meters in a storm, and you treated my injuries by guessing." "The guessing was informed," he said. "I've read a lot." "I see," said Sarath. Part 2, The Quiet Days. She stayed for 3 days before the storm broke enough to fly. Darian had no real reason to argue with this arrangement. He had no particular schedule. His survey work was self-directed, and the storm would have grounded him regardless. He had food enough for 2, if they were not extravagant, and the outpost was small, but it was warm, and she was not a difficult person to share space with once she'd established that she had no intention of discussing why she'd been on the ridge. He didn't push it. He had some experience with not pushing things. People who lived alone on outer moons, in his experience, often had things they didn't discuss, and he respected that. What he did was cook. He had a functional kitchen system, and he knew how to use it, and feeding people was something he'd always found easier than talking. He made protein stew with the dried vegetables from his stores, and flatbread cooked on the heat plate, and a dark tea from a blend he'd picked up in Port Orvith last resupply. She ate everything he put in front of her with focused attention, and on the second meal she told him it was good. "Thank you," he said. "I have not had food prepared for me in some time," she said. Then, as if she'd said too much, "I travel alone." "Me too," he said. They ate in silence for a while. He'd noticed she was careful about how she moved, measured, deliberate, designed to not reveal the extent of what her body could do. When she'd first stood up, on the afternoon of the first day, he'd seen her assess the ceiling clearance before she rose, and she'd moved from the pallet to the chair with a kind of controlled ease that his brain had registered before his conscious mind could articulate what was strange about it. She moved like someone who was accustomed to moving in spaces that were too small for her, and who had long since learned to make it look effortless. He'd also noticed that she sat with her back to the wall whenever possible, and that her eyes tracked to the door when any unusual sound came from outside, and that she'd eaten with her dominant hand, her right, always free. He noticed these things, and he filed them away, and he said nothing. On the second night, after she'd slept again and he'd sat at his workbench working on the circuit assembly, she'd woken and watched him for a while before speaking. "What are you building?" "Seismic sensor relay, for the survey network." He held it up so she could see. "The receivers on the eastern ridge keep losing calibration in the cold. I'm trying to build a compensation circuit that accounts for temperature variance." She was quiet. "Then, may I see it?" He brought it over to her. She took it with those four-fingered hands and turned it, examining the solder points and the component layout with the careful attention of someone who understood what they were looking at. "Your compensation logic is in the wrong place," she said. "You're trying to correct after the signal degrades. You should correct before, at the receiver stage, not the relay stage." Darian blinked. "How do you know that?" "I have some experience with sensor systems." She handed it back. "You would need to add a secondary thermal monitoring loop at the input side of the receiver array. Small, less than a single additional board." He looked at the circuit in his hand, and then at her, and then back at the circuit. "That would actually work." "Yes," she said, "it would." He sat back down at the workbench. After a moment he asked, "What do you do? For work, I mean. When you're not," he gestured vaguely, meaning when you're not bleeding on an icy ridge asterisk. "I am a problem solver," she said, after a pause, "of various kinds." He nodded. "I'm not going to ask." "I know," she said. "I noticed." He glanced back at her. She was watching him with those amber eyes, and there was something in her expression that he didn't have a word for, something that was not quite what he expected from someone who'd been injured and stranded and was sleeping in a stranger's space. There was no vulnerability in it. He couldn't find any vulnerability in her at all, which was interesting, because by any practical measure she was in a vulnerable position. She didn't seem to feel that way. "The tea you made last night," she said. "What was in it?" "Black tea base, some dried starfruit peel from a market in Orvith. Spice blend I worked out myself, cardamom, 2 things I don't know the English names for, and something the vendor called night root that I've never been able to identify. It tasted of something I have not had in a long time," she said. "Something from before I did what I do." He didn't ask what that meant, but he made the tea again. On the third day, the storm began to ease. Darian could tell before the instruments confirmed it. The sound of the wind against the hull changed pitch, dropping from its sustained moan to something more intermittent, and the vibration in the floor plates decreased. By mid-morning, the visibility through the exterior camera had gone from 8 meters to 40, and by afternoon he could see the ridge from the window. Sareth had spent most of the day on her feet, moving carefully around the outpost, and he could see she was testing her range of motion without being obvious about it. She was healing fast, faster than he would have healed from comparable bruising, and probably faster than her calm demeanor was letting on. "You'll be able to fly out tomorrow," he said, over the meal he made that evening. "Yes," she said, "my ship is in a low orbit, I can signal it." "Your ship is in orbit." "I descended in an emergency pod when the navigation system was damaged. The pod is on the ridge, or what's left of it after the storm." She said this with the same flat calm she said most things, but something in the slight set of her shoulders told him that the loss of the pod was a more significant thing than she was indicating. "I can still reach the ship." "What happened to your navigation system?" A pause. "It was damaged." He waited. "By something that was trying to ensure I did not reach my destination," she said. He nodded slowly. That explained the scored plating. That explained the compressed armor on her side. That explained a great deal that he hadn't asked about. "Is the threat still?" "No," she said. "It is resolved." The way she said it, flat, final, carrying the particular weight of a thing that had been resolved by her directly, was something Darian felt rather than processed. He looked at his food and then looked back at her. "Okay," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then something in her face did something he hadn't seen it do before. It softened slightly, just around the eyes, just for a second. "You are remarkably calm for someone who found a stranger in a storm and has been hosting her for 3 days without explanation." "I'm a survey technician on an outer moon," he said. "Strange things happen. You learn to take them as they come. Most people would have questions." "I have questions, I'm just not asking them." The corners of her mouth moved. It might have been the beginning of a smile. Why not? He thought about it honestly. "Because you're injured and you're a guest and it's not my business, and because—" he stopped. Because you look like someone who's been asked a lot of questions by people with bad intentions," he said, "and I didn't want to be one of those." The silence that followed was different from the other silences of the past 3 days. It was a considered silence. She was looking at him as if she was seeing something she hadn't expected to see, which, given the quality of attention those amber eyes carried, meant something. "My full designation," she said, "is Sarath Val Korath." He recognized the form of it. Val was a particle used in several connected species groups across the Eastern Quadrant, a positional marker, indicating descent or association with something larger. He didn't know Korath specifically. "Is that your family?" he asked. "My order," she said. "It is what I belong to. It is what I am." She paused. "It is something I do not usually tell people." "Thank you," he said, and meant it simply. Part 3, the name on the signal. She left the next morning. He walked her out to the equipment cache at the ridge foot, where the wind had dropped to something merely cold rather than violent, and watched her key a sequence into a device on her wrist that was too small and too precise to be standard equipment. Somewhere above them, through the thinning cloud cover, something moved in orbit. She turned to face him before the signal confirmed. "The relay circuit," she said. "You should reconfigure it the way I described. It will solve the calibration problem." "I know, I was already planning to." She nodded once. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing to do something, "If you ever transmit on frequency range 447 to 451, the subband range, not the standard register, and you include a 7-pulse identifier in the header, I will hear it." He looked at her. "Is that your personal frequency?" "It is a frequency I monitor," she said, "among other things." He understood what she was not saying, that this was not a frequency anyone was supposed to know. That she was giving it to him because she had decided, for reasons of her own, that he was someone she was willing to give it to. That she was doing it in the careful, indirect way of someone who was not accustomed to giving things to people. "I'll remember that," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, amber eyes in silver light, the ridge behind her white and vast. Then she said something in her own language that his translator didn't catch because she wasn't speaking to him through the translator. She was just speaking. Whatever it was, it sounded like something important. Then her ship came through the cloud cover, and his stomach dropped slightly, because it was not the kind of ship he'd been imagining. It was sleek and dark and fast-looking in a way that was not about passenger comfort or cargo capacity, in a way that was very specifically about other things, and it was piloted on automated approach, with a precision that indicated something very sophisticated was running the navigation. A hatch opened in the hull. She looked back at him once, and then she went up. He stood in the snow and watched it go until the cloud cover swallowed it. Then he went back inside and reconfigured the relay circuit. He didn't think about her constantly after that. He thought about her occasionally, in the way that you think about things that have shifted the internal weather slightly without making a noise about it. He thought about the way she'd held the circuit in those four-fingered hands and seen immediately what he hadn't seen. He thought about the tea she'd asked for a second time. He thought about her eyes, which had carried a quality of attention that he'd never encountered before. Not just intelligence, though that was there, but something else. Depth. The depth of someone who had seen a great many things and was still thinking about them. He reconfigured the relay. It worked perfectly. He sent a routine survey report to the regional office in Port Orvith and mentioned in passing that he'd resolved the calibration issue. The office noted it and moved on. 3 weeks later, on a quiet morning, he was running routine maintenance on the outpost's communication systems when he stumbled across something by accident. He'd been checking the signal environment on the subband frequencies, the low register, the range his old salvaged receiver picked up. Standard survey practice was to catalog what was running in your area, because unidentified signals could indicate survey equipment from other operations or, occasionally, geological events that were worth knowing about. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. But when he ran through the 447-451 range, he picked up something. Not a transmission, not a beacon, just a data tag, a small, compressed identifier packet, the kind of thing that got attached to secured channels as a handshake signal. It was cycling at the edge of the range, barely visible, designed to be invisible to anything that wasn't specifically looking for it. He sat with it for a while. Then he opened his nav database and started pulling records. Not because he was trying to identify her. He'd been scrupulous about that, had consciously not tried to identify her. But because the identifier in the packet had a suffix code he recognized from somewhere, and he was trying to remember where. It took him 4 hours. He found it in a decommissioned public archive from 14 years back, an official recognition record from the Interplanetary Security Commission, redacted almost completely, with the suffix code visible in the filing index. The recognition was for, and the document was so thoroughly redacted that he nearly missed it, an operation that had prevented a coordinated strike against 3 transit hubs in the outer systems. The kind of strike that would have killed millions. The file named no names. The file named no species. But the suffix code was there in the index, and it matched, and Darian Voss sat in his small outpost on Verath's edge for a very long time looking at the wall. He thought about scored armor plating. He thought about the threat has been resolved. He thought about a wrist device too small and precise to be standard equipment, and a ship that moved like something designed for a purpose that was not comfort. He thought about the way she'd assessed the ceiling clearance before she stood. He thought about the T. Part 4, the 7-pulse header. He didn't transmit. Not immediately, not for 2 months. He wasn't sure why not exactly. He wasn't sure what he would say. I think I know what you are * seemed presumptuous at best and dangerous at worst, and anyway, he wasn't sure he did know. He'd found a suffix code in a redacted file in a 14-year-old archive. That was circumstantial. But the frequency was there, quietly, at the edge of his receiver's range, cycling its small handshake signal, and he was aware of it the way you're aware of something warm in a cold room, not looking at it directly, but knowing it was there. On a morning in what passed for early spring on Verath's edge, slightly less cold, slightly more light, he was eating breakfast and listening to the wind, which had a different quality in the thaw, and he found himself thinking about the scar along her jaw. Old, fully healed, the kind of scar that someone who fought for a living accumulated, and that someone who fought very well for a long time managed to keep small and few. He finished breakfast. He sat at the workbench. He constructed a 7-pulse header packet. He transmitted on 449.3 megahertz and waited. 47 minutes later, his receiver pinged. The return signal was compressed, a tight, coded packet that expanded through his translation software into a single line of text. You are more persistent than I expected. He stared at that for a while, then he typed back. I wasn't sure I was going to transmit. I wasn't sure what to say. Another wait, shorter this time. What made you decide to? He thought about it. I reconfigured the relay circuit. The way you described, it works perfectly. I wanted to tell you. The wait this time was longer, long enough that he wondered if he'd said the wrong thing, or if she'd moved out of range, or if the secure channel had some kind of time limit he wasn't aware of. He kept the receiver open and made tea, and stood by the window watching a thin light try to work its way through the cloud cover. When the response came, it was, "I know it works. I was watching the survey network output. I wanted to see if you'd do it." He read that 3 times. Then he typed, "Were you testing me?" "No," she replied. "I was curious about you." They communicated irregularly after that. Not on a schedule. There was no schedule. He would transmit when something occurred to him, and she would respond when she was able, which was not always quickly but was always eventually. He developed a sense of her rhythm. She was often in places that required radio silence. She was sometimes in places that required other things he didn't ask about. She came back to the channel between those places the way a person comes back to a room they feel comfortable in. And he found that this was a thing he appreciated without having a clear explanation for why. They talked about the survey work. She had opinions about geological survey methodology that were more sophisticated than a problem solver of various kinds had any obvious reason to have, and he enjoyed finding out what those opinions were. She asked about his background, where he'd grown up, how he'd ended up on outer moon survey work, whether he found it lonely. He told her truthfully that he found it clarifying rather than lonely, that the silence was something he'd needed for reasons he didn't fully understand, and that the work itself had a quality he valued, which was that it answered its own questions. Either the readings were what they were or they weren't. She told him very little about herself in comparison, but what she told him was precise, and he suspected that what she chose to say was exactly what she meant to say, no more and no less. She told him she had been doing what she did for 22 years. She told him she had traveled to every settled system and most of the unsettled ones. She told him that she had not had someone cook for her, as he had cooked, since before she joined her order. He asked, and it was the first direct question about her nature he'd asked her, how long ago that had been. She told him she had been 17. She did not specify the time units. He did not press. He asked what her order was for. The response took a day to come. "We are the last resort," she said, "when all the systems that are supposed to protect people have failed, when the thing that is coming cannot be stopped by ordinary means. We go instead." He sat with that. "How many of you are there?" he typed. "Fewer than there should be," she said. "More than most people know about." "Is that why your name doesn't appear anywhere?" A pause, then you looked. He didn't apologize. He said, "I found a suffix code in a redacted archive. That's all. Most people who found that much would have been frightened." He thought about that. "I don't think I am," he typed. "I'm not sure why." Her response came, "I think I know why." He asked why. She said, "Because you already made the choice when you walked out into the storm. Everything since then has been consistent with that choice. You are not the kind of person who is afraid of the things he's already decided to go toward." He sat with that for a long time. Part 5. What she carried. 4 months after she left, she came back. There was no advance warning. He simply looked up from his survey console one morning and saw on the proximity alert that a ship was entering low orbit. A ship that moved the specific way her ship moved, which he'd seen once and remembered. He transmitted on 449.3, "I see you're back." She replied, "May I land?" He looked at the proximity alert. Then he typed, "The landing pad is on the south face. Winds from the northwest today, about 15 knots, so approach from the east. You'll have a clear line. She came down 20 minutes later. He watched through the exterior camera as she walked from the ship to his outpost door, and something in the way she moved was different from what he remembered. She was upright, not injured. Her suit was in good condition. She carried nothing visible. But the way she moved had a kind of heaviness to it that had nothing to do with physical burden. A weight that was somewhere internal, in the set of her shoulders, in the pace she chose. He opened the door before she knocked. She stood in the doorway in the gray Varath light and looked at him and said, "I had nowhere else I wanted to go." He stepped back to let her in. He made tea. He made it the same way he always made it, with the night root and the cardamom and the dried starfruit peel, and he brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from her and didn't say anything because he didn't think anything needed saying yet. She held the cup in both hands. She looked at it. "I have been doing this work for 22 years, she said. "I have been very good at it for most of that time." She paused. "Last month, in a system I cannot name, there was a situation that ended the way it needed to end. The outcome was what was required, but the cost of it was—" She stopped. He waited. "There were 2 others with me," she said. "They are not anymore." The silence in the room was different from the companionable silences of the 3 days she'd spent here before. It had weight. "I'm sorry," Darian said. "We knew the odds. We always know the odds." She set the cup down, looked at her own hands. "Knowing the odds does not make it different afterward." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." She looked up at him. "How do you bear ordinary things," she asked, "after something that is not ordinary? How do you come back to—" She gestured at the room, meaning the quiet, the small scale of it, the warmth, the tea. "This." He thought about it honestly. "I'm not sure you do exactly. Come back. I think maybe you carry both things at once, and the ordinary things don't cancel the other thing out. They just exist alongside it. They're there when you need something to hold." She was quiet for a while, then she said, "You lost something." "Yes." "Before you came here." "Yes." She didn't ask what. She looked at him with those amber eyes and she didn't ask, and he understood that she wasn't asking for the same reason he'd never asked her, because she recognized it as his to hold, and because she knew what it was to carry things that were too large for ordinary conversation. "There is a particular kind of loneliness," she said slowly, as if working something out as she spoke, "that comes from doing something that no one around you can understand, not because they lack intelligence, because they have not been where you have been. The context is absent. You carry the experience alone." "Yes," he said. "I have been doing this for 22 years, she said again. "I have not," she stopped again, picked up the cup, held it. "I have not spoken to anyone outside my order about what it is in more than 15 years. He looked at her across the table, this extraordinary person with her silver skin and her amber eyes, and her 22 years of being the last resort for everyone who needed one, sitting in his small outpost on an outer moon because she had nowhere else she wanted to go. "You can talk about it here," he said. "If you want to or not, either is fine." "You would not find it." "I won't find it anything you don't want me to find it," he said. "I'm asking you to stay as long as you need to, that's all." Sarath Valkoreth sat with her tea in both hands and looked at Darian Voss and said nothing for a very long time. He got the impression she was doing something she'd needed to do for a while, which was simply rest. Not sleep, rest. The kind of thing you could only do if you decided that a place was safe, and the decision itself was the rest. Outside, the Varath wind moved through the empty white landscape. The instruments hummed. The heating element in the wall did its small work. "Tell me about the survey you're working on," she said finally. He told her. Part 6, The Depth of IT. She stayed for 9 days. She helped him run the seismic sensor calibration on the eastern ridge. which went faster with 2 people than it had ever gone with 1. She was better with precision equipment than she had any obvious reason to be, and she moved in the cold with the ease of someone who had spent considerable time in worse environments, and she made her own observations about the geological formation that were not the observations of a non-specialist. On the 4th day he asked her where she'd been trained, meaning academically, meaning before the order. She told him she'd been trained at a research institution in the core systems, geophysics and materials science, with a secondary emphasis in applied mathematics. She'd been 17 when she'd left that and joined something else, but the first 17 years had made her the kind of person she'd become, which was someone who understood systems and how they failed and how they could be repaired. She paused, then said, "I have not thought about that in a long time, who I was before." "Do you miss her?" he asked, "the person you were?" She considered it. "I do not miss her. She was very young and very unformed. She did not yet know what she was for." A pause. "But I think I have missed her education, what it felt like to study something because you wanted to understand it, not because understanding it would allow you to stop something terrible." "You could study again," he said. She looked at him as if he'd said something slightly absurd. Then she looked away, and he thought maybe she was reconsidering whether it was absurd. "I am not sure I know how to live differently," she said. "The order has been my life for 22 years. I don't know what I would be without it." "You'd be someone who likes tea and has strong opinions about sensor relay configurations." She was quiet. Then that small shift around her eyes that he'd learned was her version of something breaking open a little. "That is not much to build a life on." "It's something," he said. They were on the ridge. The sky above them was doing something unusual. The cloud cover had broken, and the light was coming through at a low angle that turned the snow amber and the distant peaks a deep, luminous blue. It was the kind of beauty that happened on outer moons occasionally, without warning, as if the environment was reminding you that it could. She was looking at the peaks. "When I came here the first time," she said, "I did not intend to transmit the distress signal." He looked at her. "What?" "The beacon was built into the suit. It activated automatically when my biosigns dropped below a threshold." She paused. "I had decided, before I lost consciousness, that I would not call for help, that the situation was resolved and the outcome was acceptable, and what happened to me afterward was immaterial." He stood in the amber snow and looked at her profile against the blue light of the peaks, and understood what she was telling him. "Sereth, I am telling you because you should know," she said. "Not to alarm you. I am not in that place now. I am very far from that place." She turned to look at him. "But I want you to know that when the beacon activated and you came, and when you carried me across that ridge and brought me inside and made tea, you did not do a small thing. You did not know it was not a small thing, but it was not." He didn't say anything for a moment. The wind moved through the gap in the ridge where they were standing, and it was cold, and the light was doing that rare, beautiful thing on the snow. "I'm glad the beacon activated," he said. "I know," she said. "I am also glad now." They stood on the ridge in the amber light, and after a while she pointed to a formation in the rock face below the eastern peak and asked him what had made it, and he told her, and she asked more questions. Good questions, precise questions, the questions of someone who was genuinely interested, and they stayed out there until the light changed and the cold drove them back down. On the 7th day, she told him more. He hadn't asked. She'd been quiet that evening, in a particular kind of quiet that he recognized as something working its way to the surface, and he'd given her the room to do that by reading at his desk and not asking anything. She told him about her order. Not in comprehensive detail. There were things she was clearly not going to say, and he had no expectation that she would, but in the shape of it, how it functioned, how she had come to it at 17, which had been through a sequence of events she described only in outline and what it had given her and what it had cost. She told him about the two she'd lost. Not names. She said she didn't share names outside the order, and he understood that was about their safety even after death, but who they had been to her. One had been with her for 11 years, the other for 6. Both had been people of extraordinary capability and ordinary human need, and she had cared for them with the same fierce precision she brought to everything else, and the absence of them was. She didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need her to. He made more tea. He put it on the table beside her and sat across from her and listened, and when she paused he did not rush to fill the silence, because he understood that the silence was part of it. She talked for 2 hours. Afterward she sat for a moment in the way someone sits when they've put down something heavy and are adjusting to the difference. Then she looked at him. "You are very good at this," she said. "At what?" "At being present, at listening without making it about yourself, without performing it." She paused. "It is not a common skill." "I've had some practice at it," he said, "at being with things instead of trying to fix them." "Most people who are lonely want to fix the loneliness in others," she said, "because they are looking for something. You are not." She stopped. "You are here, but you are not looking for something from me." He thought about that. "I like you," he said. "I find you remarkable, but I don't need you to be anything for me. You don't have to fix my loneliness or fill something. You can just be what you are." She was quiet for a long moment. "I have been many things," she said carefully. "For 22 years I have been a very specific thing, the last resort, the one who goes when no one else can." She paused. "I do not think I know how to be simply Sarath, without the other thing attached." "You've been Sarath for 9 days," he said. "You've been pretty good at it so far." And that made her laugh. It was a short sound, a surprised sound, something that seemed to come out of her before she could decide whether to let it out. It was the best thing he'd heard in a very long time. Part 7, the thing that doesn't need a name. On the morning of the 9th day, she told him she needed to go. He was expecting it, not with resignation exactly, but with the practical acceptance of someone who had learned that things that were good were not always things that could be permanent, and that permanence wasn't the point. She had somewhere to be. She had 22 years of being what she was, and that did not resolve itself in 9 days on an outer moon, and she was not someone who would stop being what she was because she had also become someone who drank tea and laughed at unexpected moments. But she stood in his outpost on the morning of the 9th day, with her suit in good repair and her ship ready in low orbit, and she looked at him with her amber eyes, and something in her face was different from the first time she'd left. Less guarded, more itself. "I don't know when I will be back," she said. "I know. It could be a long time. What I do is not. The intervals are not predictable." "I'll be here," he said, "or somewhere close. You have the frequency." She looked at him. "You would wait." "I'm not waiting," he said. "I'm living. You're part of how I live now. Those aren't the same thing." She was quiet. "Then, what I told you, about the night I came here the first time, what I decided before I lost consciousness." "Yes. I want you to know that I am not in that place. I said that before, but I want to say it clearly. Whatever I am now, whatever this is," she paused, "I want to continue it. I want to continue being someone who knows you. That is not something I say easily." He looked at her and felt, not the romantic urgency he might have felt once with someone else, a long time ago before the thing he'd lost. Something quieter than that. Something with more gravity, the kind of gravity that actual distance created, the real kind. Not absence, but the awareness of how much space there was between any two people, and how interesting it was to choose to cross it anyway. "I want that too," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, with the careful deliberateness he'd learned was how she did things she meant, she reached out and put her hand, briefly, against the side of his face. 4 fingers warm, a touch that lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then she stepped back. "The tea," she said. "The blend you make. What was the name of the vendor in Port Orvith who sold you the night route?" He told her. "I will find some," she said, "when I am next in that sector, so I can have it when I am not here." He understood what that meant, that she would carry this with her. That she would take something of this place and keep it in the spaces between the things she did that he would never know about. That the tea was not really about the tea. "Safe travels," he said. She went. He stood by the window and watched her ship climb through the cloud cover, and when it was gone, he stood there a moment longer. Then he went back to his bench. He had a seismic sensor network to run. He had a survey to complete. He had work that was his own, that answered its own questions, that had a quality of clarity he'd needed and still needed, and which would be there tomorrow the same as it had been today. He had a receiver picking up signals on frequencies most people filtered as noise. He had a frequency, 449, 3 megahertz sub-band 7-pulse header, at the edge of the register. He made tea. Epilogue. What returns? She came back 3 months later, and 6 months after that, and then irregularly, without pattern, without schedule, in the way that things came back when they genuinely wanted to. Each time she was a little different. Each time she told him a little more. Each time the thing that had no name between them had more weight, more specific gravity, more of the particular texture of something that was being built slowly, by 2 people who understood that the building was the thing, not the arrival at any destination. He learned over those months and then those years what she was. Not from her directly. She was careful always about what she said, and he respected that carefulness because he understood it was professional rather than personal. But piece by piece, from things she let slip, from the way she moved, and the things she knew and the weight she sometimes carried when she arrived, he assembled the shape of it. The galaxy had monsters, not the kind that people usually meant when they said the word, not simple violence or ordinary cruelty, though it had plenty of both. Monsters of coordination, of scale, of the kind of harm that required planning and sophistication and resources that most individuals and even most governments couldn't counter, the kind that didn't announce themselves until they were already operational. There were people who went toward those things. Not many, fewer than there should be. They were the last resort, and they were good at what they did, and almost no one knew they existed, and this was by design, because the monsters they hunted had long reach. Sareth Valkorath was very good at what she did. He understood that this meant there were things she had done, would do, that were necessary and that were not comfortable to contemplate. He did not contemplate them in any specific way. He knew, as a general truth, that the people who kept the settled galaxy from the worst versions of itself sometimes had to be capable of things that the settled galaxy would prefer not to think about. He held that truth as a general truth, and he loved the specific person, and he did not try to reconcile them because they did not need reconciling. They were both true. She told him once that he was the only person outside her order who knew her full designation. He asked what had made her decide to tell him. She said, "Because you walked into a storm to find a stranger, because you asked nothing in return, because you made tea." She paused. "And because I have spent 22 years being known for what I do rather than who I am, and I found that I wanted someone to know both." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I know both." She looked at him with those amber eyes, full of all the things she'd seen, and all the things she was, and all the things that didn't fit easily into words, and she said, "I know you do." Outside, the Vareth wind moved through the clean, cold dark. The receiver hummed at the edge of its range. The instruments ran their small, faithful cycles. And in a warm outpost at the edge of the explored world, 2 people sat with their tea and the weight of their respective histories and the particular, hard-won piece of people who had found, not by looking, but by the accident of a storm and a salvaged receiver and a choice to walk toward something unknown, that there was another person in the galaxy who knew the right shape of the silence. That was enough. It was, in fact, quite a lot. Word count, ~9, 950 words runtime, ~62 minutes at 160 WPM asterisk. Engine, human competence / alien warrior revealer energy family. 2. Quiet depth appearance tier. Moderate. Film DNA, binary 2019. Dual identity concealed beneath calm surface. Lethal capability hidden in apparent vulnerability. Slow burn revelation of who someone truly is.